All right, so John, introduction to the book of John. I will start with your questions, which are getting better and better, right? You guys are getting really good at this. I'm just amazed how you've progressed in such short time, and really, like, your brain is really working perfect. So yes, so let's start with Rudolph. Yes. So all of you had amazing comments, but anyways, so Rudolph begins with, so he notices rightly that chapter 1 is an allusion to logos, the Greek logos, right? This is, John is writing clearly in this chapter, and throughout the book, by the way, there's a double audience. If you read the book, if you're Hebrew, you get a lot of material that is aimed at you, but also if you're Greek, you also get a lot of there's a lot of allusions to Greek thinking, Greek vocabulary. So there's 2 layers to this book. There's a Greek layer and the Hebrew layer. And of course, especially chapter 1 is symptomatic of this, and we'll study it together so you'll see them more clearly. A lot of you are wondering the connection of Jesus to God. So this we will actually address throughout the class. But one thing we will deal with is, so we have to sift, I think, between what the church has interpreted and what the text is saying, right? So for sure, the church has very quickly made very clear statements, very categorical statements that Jesus is God, right? The issue with that is that the text is actually much more subtle about that. There is what we call the Messianic Secret. And this is found in all 4 Gospels, where the identity of Jesus is never truly revealed. It's hinted at, but it's never truly revealed. And I kind of want to talk about that a little bit too, because I think this was also Cologne's comment, right? He's like, why doesn't the text in John 1, be more clear? In the beginning was Jesus, and Jesus was God, and Jesus came down to earth, right? Why is the text so subtle? So we're stumbling upon this notion of the Messianic secret. And I want to stop a little bit with you guys, and because the text throughout, by the way, all 4 Gospels remain very elusive. There are glimpses, there are hints of the identity of Jesus, but nothing as clear-cut as what the church has made it to be, right? So why do you think all 4 Gospels are trying to keep this hidden, right? And if you read the Gospels, it is hard to come to a definite conclusion as to who Jesus was, right? You never have a clear cut. So why are the Gospels intentionally not being clear cut about who Jesus is? Anyone have any idea why this would be the case? Because it is. Why are the Gospels intentionally wrapping up Jesus, right? Or hinting, but at the same time, it's not clear. Williams, go ahead. We can start with you.
Because it allows more speculation and also allows you to change. So like God goes through several periods of transformation, and in most of the text, his descriptions change. So if you don't have a clear, Jesus doesn't have a clear identity, you can change him slowly to be closer to what the societies reflect the societies that you're trying to preach to.
That's interesting. I like that. Meaning Jesus, the identity of Jesus remains vague, but different cultures, different ages can interpret it differently according to their needs. That's interesting. Good. I like that. Let's see. Rudolph, go ahead.
So first up, thanks for the compliment, but I didn't come up all by myself translating word into logos. The hour I had to read up on it, there is a lot of literature that says there are connections and this is how it could be interpreted and what have you. And that could be interpreted is actually the reason why I was questioning it. You are asking the same question in a different way. Why is it vague? Why is it smoke and mirrors?
Yes.
I believe it is fabricated by what you called the church earlier in order to just simply have more leeway to preach and expound on an idea. Look at when the New Testament was written, much, much later than the Old Testament. So this is like the new edition. This is now quite some time later. different societal circumstances and a different vibe and culture, a more modern outlook. So it had to be somehow reinvented. I don't want to give the church too much credit here, but the people who were involved in putting the New Testament together were really, really great thinkers, and they wrapped their head around what was going on at the time. So that's my stance.
Did they though? Because you see, even the Gospel of Mark, it's so interesting. It's my favorite gospel. Throughout the gospel, almost everybody, the disciples, the people, the family of Jesus are asking, who is this guy? Right? There's the ongoing, so God, Mark is the most uncertain and ambivalent gospel. And then the end of the gospel, it ends actually, the earliest manuscripts, right? There's then later additions to the Gospel of Mark, but the original manuscript ends with the empty tomb. It doesn't end like all the other gospels, like, yes, and then Jesus came back and, and he talked to a bunch of people and then he flew to heaven, right? So Gospel of Mark actually, which is the oldest gospel we have, this is the source of the other gospels, ends with a question. What happened? The tomb is empty. What's happening, right? So I think the church has in a way obliterated this messianic secret and made it all clear cut, and then, come with brandish the cross in the face of everybody in the world and said, you need to believe this, right? Or you will go to hell. So I think there is a reason why the gospels are unclear, ambiguous, or themselves doubting and questioning what is happening, right? Gospel of Mark ends with a question, right? This is why I'm putting the Gospels in the wisdom literature in general, in the continuation of Hebrew wisdom literature, because they're full of questions. It is the church later on who came up with a bunch of answers, which are not really in the Gospels, right? So it's very interesting. We can think about it some more, but I just wanted to throw this out to you guys, this notion of the Messianic secret, this notion that really the Gospels, when you read them carefully, they remain everything is very subtle, and it's hard to misunderstand what's going on, as we'll see with the Gospel of John, right? If there is really here a manifestation of God, right, as the Christians believe, it is really a manifestation of the unknown God, the God that we cannot grasp and understand and figure out what is happening, right? So good. Good. So that was a good comment. Then, of course, yes, Rudolph, you're asking, who is Jesus? A bunch of you are asking that, and we'll try to look at that today a little bit, based at least on the text that we have. Okay, great observation, Anderson. I was very pleased. You're doing good literary analysis. You noticed very rightly the beginning of the text of John 1. It begins in the beginning. And yes, this is a direct reference to Genesis 1. So we have to ask ourselves why. Why is the author referring to Genesis 1? And we're going to study that today, actually. We're going to look at that. So that's an excellent observation, very good question. That's how I want you guys to read, right? To notice the connections between texts or repetitions or weird details, right? That's really good. So we'll come to that, Anderson. Okay, Butterfield, yes. Let's see if I can read what I wrote. Yes, okay. Okay, two good questions, two very good questions. So number one, Butterfield is asking, why do we have all these supernatural miracles? Like, we're losing the wisdom literature atmosphere, right? Where it's all about embracing life. I think someone else made this comment and said, I think it was Edmund, right? If wisdom literature that we studied, the texts we studied up until now are all about embracing life as it is, right? Why is Jesus coming along and,
right, exactly.
Was that you, right? Edmund?
Yeah, that was me. Yeah.
Exactly. You and Butterfield actually have the same question, right? Why these miracles? Why are we going against what life has ordered for us, right? If we are to adopt the Ecclesiastes kind of Stoic perspective that, we need to take good and bad and we need to embrace life as it comes. Why is Jesus coming around like a magician? It's like, shifting things around. So I'm curious, what do you guys think? What is happening? Is this a refusal of life? Why why do we need these miracles? Or, I mean, some people argue these are, well, I won't do that because I stay with the text that we have, but some people say, oh, these were later additions to make Jesus look good, right? But I think there's no credible evidence of this. The only evidence we have is the text. So I'm sticking to the text as it was written. But yeah, anybody have any ideas about how the miracles in a way are messing things up in terms of what we've been learning up until now in wisdom literature, or are they? I'm just curious. So let's start with Christodoulou, then Rudolph, then Williams.
Yeah, it doesn't sit right with me, because like the traditional like church understanding of the Bible church was like these were to kind of prove who we want to the people. But it seems like if that's what we're gonna take, like they got very lucky. They got to see all these miracles and we get nothing. We have to have faith. It doesn't seem like a lesson for us. They got it handed to them and we just have to.
Yes, you're right. So so you're another one who is uncomfortable with with these miracles. Very good. Rudolph, let's hear you on this. You're muted.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm actually a very objective person in my life. Nonetheless, even if I look at these stories as parables and metaphors, and maybe the story of John being a Renaissance idea of the inexplicable, there were more moments in my life where I could not explain why my very inner thoughts actually translated into a real action in my life. There are lots of people around who say, well, this is when the angels are sitting on your shoulder and these miracles appear. You got to start believing in something, it'll come to you. I have a hard time with the entire principle, and I don't really have another explanation, as in, nor did the priests or the church have any back then when they wrote it. The philosophers who came up with the idea to memorialize philosophical thoughts had to somehow make it bite-sized for the regular populace to understand it.
Okay, good. So yes, so you're also, so actually you're saying that miracles, you know, there are, even in our own lives, we have experienced miracles, right? I mean, you can argue that Ruth experienced a miracle, right? To a certain degree, right? So, so you're saying this is just an extension of ordinary life that we simply haven't developed an awareness of, right? It's there, it's part of our lives, but some of us tap into it better than others, perhaps. So that's interesting. I like that too. Let's see. Oh, I think you had something to say earlier.
Not anymore, but I guess just like this. That's a really good question. I think what I've been taught is just like it was given miracles because it shows his heart in a sense. It shows the person of Jesus. It shows that he wasn't somebody that just, I guess, going off this class versus mother's house. He wasn't someone that just like expected all these rules and regulations and rituals, but like he was somebody that like, you know, that was going against like society's norms of like acceptable and like showing compassion in that sense. Because like all the people that he healed and the miracles were like usually people that weren't accepted in that time period, I guess. And like, and at the same time he was rebuking all these like high esteemed and like all these like the 10% Pharisees and things like that. So I guess for me the answer would be yeah, just his heart in a sense, but like kind of no, yeah.
No, I love that. I love that because you're showing how the miracles were not there to make some kind of spectacular statement. They were an extension of his compassion, like he couldn't resist. And we see that, by the way. It goes very well with the text. He's not looking to do miracles. In fact, he wants to avoid miracles because they're deviating from, we'll see what is his true teaching. They deviate, but people are coming and he has compassion and he can't help himself, right? That's what I'm seeing. So I love the way you put it. Very nice.
And also one more thing, what Christodoulou said about like how they had miracles at that time, but like we don't anymore. So I guess they're like we're at a disadvantage. But like I would like to argue that like despite all these miracles being shown and like all these people seeing it, at the very end of his life, there's only 12 disciples. So like, I don't think it's necessarily the miracles that kind of persuade the person to follow like Christ, but it was more so of seeing his actions to the like the weak and like compassion and all these other things.
That's a good point. The miracles didn't do much for him, did they? In terms of gathering a following, right? So they didn't have much power, right? What really worked ultimately was the close ties he had knit with his disciples, and they're the ones who continued the movement, right? So very nice, excellent. Williams, can you conclude us on this miracles?
So I was going to bring up the fact that if you ever read Grant Morrison? So Grant Morrison is a comic book creator, and he wrote a whole bunch of comics. He basically is one of the craziest people ever. He spent the night taking MDMA, and he basically said that he saw that aliens or fifth dimensional beings basically watch us, and it's really interesting. And he talks about the fact that like all of our stories are not stories. They're about the fact that it's helping us evolve. Even our comic books, he said it's not really a comic book. He said a story like the Bible is really just a story that you're not really realizing that it's to help you get to another point in reality, to help you get to to help us evolve. And basically he feels that all stories that we tell ourselves are about this fact. And even the parable of Jesus, if written as a comic book, is like that. So I feel like the stories are more about our evolution and not about the stories themselves. The characters are irreverent. We could have them be anything.
Okay, I like that. I can imagine Jesus in Marvel Studios. So, but yeah, no, you have a point. And that was going to be my point, why the miracles, at least in the Gospel of John, many of these miracles are told in a way to have symbolic meaning. So, but I preferred O's answer, to be honest. I like that they were just to overflow with compassion. But I think also the way that the storyteller of the Gospel of John tells the miracles, especially the wedding of Cana, there's so much symbolism and lessons, right, written within this story of the miracles. So I'm seeing the miracles often just like object lessons or containing deep symbolism as to what we can learn and what wisdom we can acquire, right? So, okay, Giannakopoulos, you...
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the miracles as well because, you know, we see from every single interaction with Christ that he was actually trying to do his own thing. And people would always come up to him and ask him for help, or they would question him, or try to see what his prerogative is. You know, people would come to him, you know, in every single case, even with when he healed the guy's son. Who was it?
I don't think it says it.
I don't remember what was his station. He was like a commander of some sort. Oh, the centurion's son,
Yeah.
right? He didn't go to the centurion. He didn't even go to his house.
Yeah.
You know, the centurion asked him, he's like, please heal my son. And he was like, all right, I guess if I have to, kind of, you know? So that was how Christ was in every single aspect.
Yeah, that's very good. That goes to O's point that he wasn't looking to be spectacular and, you know, looking like going around like, what's his name? The big magician Copperfield, right? So he's avoiding that, but his compassion is in a way taking over, right? So great. Okay, well, I thought that was a good answer. Hopefully Butterfield is satisfied with some of our discussion. Where's Butterfield? Where is our Butterfield? We don't know if she's there. Okay. Yeah, another really good question by Butterfield, which we'll talk about actually. Why wasn't Jesus immediately accepted by his people, right? I mean, for Christians in general, it's so obvious, right? We've been 2,000-year brainwashed to think that Jesus is the Messiah, right? So it makes us, we get really kind of, you know, shocked that they didn't recognize. So there's actually reasons for that, which we'll talk about, especially when I define the concept of the Son of Man, which I'm going to do today. We're going to see a little bit why they had such a hard time accepting Jesus. Williams, I'm skipping you since you did the wrong assignment. And I'm going to Cologne. So yes, Cologne, I think we addressed already what you said about why they're not clear, right? This is the Messianic Secret that we just talked about. Where's Cologne? There he is. You can stay down, Cologne, if you want. And then, yes, Cologne is asking really good question about the first miracle and why that particular miracle. And of course, there is reason for that. The author is choosing, or I don't know if the author is choosing that miracle or if Jesus intentionally, right? But there's definitely, the way it's written is that this is really full of symbols, full of meanings. And hopefully today we have a little time to talk about Cana. So we'll see. Okay, so Edmonds, I think we talked about the miracles, Genesis 1. Oh yeah, that was interesting, what you said. So what's new with Jesus? I think also someone else asked this was Kirschnitz. That was a good question. So what's he bringing to the table? And I've had this question asked of me many, many times when I talk to Jewish people about Jesus, right? And it's always like perplexed, and I'm always like, yeah, that's a good point. What is he bringing to the table that's new, right? And Edmund says this is actually a really good point. People have been conversing with God since the beginning of the world, right? Why do we need all of a sudden now an intermediary, right? Why do we need someone to come between us and God and kind of be the bridge, right? When we've been talking freely to God, right, since the beginning of times. This is also, by the way, I think this is perhaps, this is Kirschnitz, I think, also says that, right? So we're going to talk about that. I don't believe, I don't know everything about Jesus because of the Messianic Secret, and it's like an infinite thing to study, but it seems to me that this notion of Jesus as a bridge between us and God is not the most important point. And I don't think I think this is something that has developed later. In our text, I think Jesus is doing something else. His purpose is different. This will be my interpretation. Obviously, the Messianic Secret makes it so that we all can interpret. It's a very rich text, right? But I will give you what I'm seeing. And of course, you're free to see something else, right? This is why it's so complex and vast and enigmatic, right? But yeah, so I don't think this is, it's true that there's a case to be made. Paul says that Jesus is a kind of sacrifice, right? Which is supposed to link us to God. And I think there's a lot of evidence for that, but I'm not going to focus on that idea. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm saying there's another way to see it. I can't say it's wrong because it's in the Paulinian epistles really developed. So there's certainly something there, which I haven't yet fully understood. I'm going to take a different direction, which might be more satisfactory to people like Edmonds and Kirschnitz. So I'm not going to focus on this theological aspect of Jesus, which I think is worth exploring, but I'm not going to do that here. Rudolph, go ahead.
So it's an interesting notion that what is Jesus bringing new? When you're mentioning the Jewish beliefs, so how do Jews redeem themselves from sin? What is done in that religion that when you sin to make up for it? What's the process?
The Day of Atonement. Every year, since the beginning of times, since Moses, they go to the temple or synagogue.
You go to the temple, you have,
and it's over.
and I believe that the reason why Jesus was, for lack of a better term, invented was look prior to what happened to the sin. For hundreds of years, people just sinned and had no outlet. There was no salvation. There was nobody there who said, listen, it's okay, you're just human. But if you do this, time will heal all wounds and you're going to get by. So I think he was the answer to Christianity's thirst for some sort of redemption.
Okay, yes, absolutely. We're going to talk about this redemptive part, but not in terms of sin. And I'm trying to open up a new pathways to understand Jesus, which is not theological, right? Of course, I'm not downplaying the theological, just like I'm not downplaying the Father's house, right? But I'm gonna look at it more philosophically, obviously, since this is a philosophy class. But yeah, certainly this whole aspect is worth exploring, and it is there, and it certainly is there by people who are serious and can be taken seriously, such as Paul, right? Williams, what do you have to say?
I was going to say to Rudolph's point, there's actually a good article by a professor at John Jay. I took a class there, and it was about sexuality and how the Catholic Church doesn't really stand in the way of things like carnival, which is a full embrace of sexuality, for the simple fact that they understand people need a release. And Jesus's creation was about the fact that they have to learn how to live with sin, almost like the mother's house teaching, where they had to learn how to accept that sin is part of the human process. And that the reason why they don't stop carnival, and because they haven't stopped carnival in pretty much every Catholic country it exists, is because people need to go out and have sex with weird people, because that's just something that people do. And as long as you can keep it buttoned up for most of the year, we'll excuse you if you go out for 1 week and have sex with a weirdo. We don't care. No, seriously, that was
no, I agree. This is one of the strengths of the Catholic Church, was to really understand human nature to a very deep degree, and to work with it rather than against it, right? So Puritanism that came later under the Reformation kind of lost that wisdom, right? It's like, you know. So Judaism was like that too. Judaism in general is very tolerant of transgression and tries to work with it rather than suppress it. So yeah, very interesting. Yes. Okay, going to O now. O had so many questions. It was so nice. So yes, interesting point there where you talk where he's observing that Jesus cleanses the temple, and he's asking if this is a way for Jesus to kind of go against the Father's house, right? So Jesus has really ambiguous attitude toward the temple, and we're going to see why. There is a very close connection in this gospel. Actually, this is one of the gospels who talks about the temple the most. And Jesus actually, in the other gospels, we see him when he was 12 years old, deeply attracted to the temple, right? I think I mentioned this earlier. I forget which gospel, but this is when he's 12 years old. His parents bring him to Jerusalem for the first time. And he wanders off into the temple, and he's so mesmerized by what's going on there, by the rituals, by the teachings, by the classes, the discussions, right? He loses sense of time and space and ends up staying there for 3 days and 3 nights while his parents have already left the city, right? So, and then his mother takes him and she says, no, this is not for you. You need to come home, right? So we talked about this, how Jesus certainly has a very strong gravitational pull towards the Father's house, towards the temple. And at the same time, his mother is saying, you're meant for another path, right? You're going to go in a different direction. So we're going to talk about this connection with the temple. Oh my God, there's a cat. It's not my cat, but it's like all alone in the hallway and it's mewing. Can you hear him? No? Okay, good. All right, so we'll talk about this, definitely. Now, the dichotomy light-darkness, we will talk about how the book of John is written in a way that seems very, there's a very dark versus light kind of apocalyptic approach, and we're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the style a little later today, so we'll address that. Number 12, obviously, this is in reflecting the 12 tribes of Israel, right? It's as though Jesus is building a new, not a new religion, but a continuation for sure, but it's a new impulse, right? A new breath. We'll talk about that. And just a few words on the Pharisees. I'm going to talk about the priests and the Pharisees in a bit, but we're going to see that actually the Pharisees are not necessarily the bad guys in the story, and we're going to talk about that. You wonder why Jesus is so aggressive to the Pharisees. Actually, he's not. We're going to see that in a second. Let's see. Olivera. Interesting comment, Olivera. She's saying, in this gospel, Jesus seems to be so elevated, right, that we don't see a connection between him and the average Joe, she says, right? So actually, I would like to go against this view, right? In where what I want us to learn in this gospel is actually what we're going to learn, and I'll explain in the introduction in a bit, is that actually Jesus, this will be the whole idea of how I'm going to interpret the text. I'm going to interpret the text as Jesus as the ultimate awakened human being, meaning that whatever he is doing, we can do it too, right? So, and I'm going to talk how I get to this idea that Jesus is the awakened human being, that we all, in a way, he's displaying to us what it means to be truly human, not necessarily, and of course, displaying the divine, but the divine in the human. We're going to talk about this. So before I get all jumbled up, I just want to briefly say that because I'll get into it more. But we're going to see that Jesus actually is supposed to be a human pathway, not some kind of right abstraction. Olivera, go ahead.
When I was reading that Jesus got angry and then he was like speaking louder and stuff with the people who are selling stuff, I remember from yesterday's class, and then I was like, if even Jesus can turn some tables, the woman can always also turn some tables.
Yes.
I felt like, yeah, so it makes sense what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, in the Hebrew Bible, all emotions are allowed, right? People are very emotional in the Middle East in general, right? So Jesus is very, very, very Jewish, right, in his expression. Okay, what just happened? Sorry, get my video back. I barely touched this and the camera goes off. It's so annoying. Okay. I'm sorry, guys. Okay. Yes. Okay, I'm back. Okay, great. So yes, so we'll come to that. Okay, Bernard, I love Bernard when she talks about how Mary is the one who pushes Jesus into his first miracle, right? So the role of the woman in kind of like Ruth has to give Boaz a push, right? Here Mary is giving Jesus a push. So the woman kind of as the instigator of the whole mission of Jesus is interesting, and we'll talk about that. This is relevant, right? And she's wondering if there were any female disciples. I'm going to answer that right now. Yes, there were plenty. They were not among the 12, but they were considered disciples. I'll give you, first of all, they're named. There are a number of women, older women who were very wealthy, who supported Jesus, and they were considered disciples. So we have those. And then we have Mary of Bethany. I don't know if she's here. Let me see if... Bernard, I don't know if she's here, but
yes, I'm here.
You're here. Okay. If you remember the story when Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus in Bethany, and Martha comes in the room and she's like, hey, can you get my sister to help me? What the hell, right? And Jesus is like, your sister has chosen the right path, right? Do not bother her. This expression, sitting at the feet, is used to describe discipleship, right? So Mary in this text is described with the technical word for disciple. So and Martha seems to be going against that, saying, why is she acting like that, right? Like a disciple, this is for men. And Jesus, it rebukes her and says, no, she can be here, she can be a disciple too. So this is really what's going on. It's not so much about she's not helping me and I'm doing everything around here. It's more about her disputing the possibility for a woman to be a disciple like a man. And Jesus is clearly telling her, no, her place is here. She will not leave. She is a disciple like the men. So there is a lot in the text about female discipleship. And if you go even further into the Gospels, which didn't make it in the canon, right? You have a number of women who wrote Gospels, right? You have the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. You have a number of Gospels. There's a variation on the book of Acts, right? And there you have a very strong female presence. As the church became more and more Roman, right? And therefore more and more patriarchal, these narratives were set aside because Greece had taken over. The Greek culture takes over. So, but in the beginning, certainly there were a lot of women around Jesus and who were considered technically as disciples. And later Gospels were written by women, but as the church became more and more male or male dominated and Greek, right? These Gospels fell and we lost this tradition. Does this answer your question a little bit, Bernard?
Yes, definitely. I like that point of view of Jesus defending the woman's right to be there. It's very interesting.
Yeah. And the technical term, right, at his feet, this is a technical term that indicates she was discipling. I mean, she was being discipled, right? Giannakopoulos, go ahead. Let's hear. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always going to say Christ was a huge defender of women in so many different times in the Bible. And he had like 7,000 minor disciples. Now, obviously not at the same level of the 12, but he had huge multitudes, not that would follow him everywhere he went, but they were in the cities, people that loved him so much. And a vast multitude of them were women, even children.
Nice. That's interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of stories in the gospel that say when he would defend women all the time, even women that had quote unquote unclean blood. She was healed just by the touching the hem of his garment. Him defending the fornicated, the woman that fornicated. So many times they're just not talked about that much.
Yeah, very good. Yes, definitely. There's a whole, and we haven't seen it over the years because, again, the Bible has been read by male readership, right? And the leadership in the church has been male. So we've missed this whole feminine component, which hopefully we'll try and rediscover together. So, Kirshnes, I think we covered this notion. What is the, well, not yet, but we raised the issue of the need for Jesus, right? If God speaks to his people directly. Same idea as Edmonds, right? You made the same point, and we'll talk about that. What is the point of Jesus? What is he bringing to the table that we don't already have? And I'm going to talk about that. And then Christodoulou, you mentioned the issue of the Trinity. Yes, I agree with you. This is a later construct. This whole idea that there's a kind of like, I mean, again, this is all these attempts, right, at conceptualizing and discoursing about the nature of God, of Jesus, is going against, in my view, the Messianic secret. As soon as you start to create dogma out of who Jesus is, you're destroying the Messianic secret, which is supposed to be something that all of us can feel comfortable exploring freely, rather than being imposed upon with, this is how you need to see it, right? So the church, sadly, has really crystallized, has really, in a way, in my view, dissolved the Messianic secret, tried to make things very clear and dogmatic, and in doing so, to be honest, has alienated half the world, to really gain anything from the Gospels, right? Nobody wants to. Some of these discourses on Jesus are honestly a turnoff to most of the world. So the way that the Jesus has been made into this very fixed, rigid entity that we have to believe in or else, right, has really destroyed the whole beauty and wonder and mystery of this Messianic secret, which was meant to be opened individually by different people in different ways. At least that's how I see it. It's a Messianic secret. Why? So that we can all come to it and open it differently in a way that, connects with us, right? But the way that they have just pushed that aside and said, here, believe this, was really a big mistake, in my view. Big pedagogical mistake, theological mistake, exegetical mistake, on all levels. So thank you, Christodoulou. I think I would agree with you on this big problem. And I'm trying to read what I wrote. Oh, yeah. So your question about how the Gospel of John sounds very Father's House-ish because of this emphasis on you need to believe in Jesus or else, I'm going to show has less to do with Jesus's teachings than with John writing in an apocalyptic style. We're going to talk about that. So actually I need to talk about that here somewhere. And this is when my pen runs out. Okay, so hopefully I'll remember. Okay, so, and then Perso, yes, same thing. You are questioning, like a lot of people, what is the connection between Jesus and God? And this we will try to address in a way that is palatable, hopefully, to your ears. Okay, are we ready? I would like to introduce a little bit. Are we ready? Is there anything else you guys want to talk about? Okay. All right, so I'm going to introduce a little bit the Gospel of John, and then we'll take a break and then study a text together. So, so Gospels, again, I'm going to make the same argument as I've done before. Mother's house text, right? Especially the Gospel of John. In fact, the Gospel of John is framed by women, right? And I think some of you noticed that. Is that Jesus' mother who pushes him to start, right? His first miracle, his first manifestation. And in the end, it's Mary Magdalene who sees him when he is resurrected and who brings this news to the disciples. So there is a woman at the beginning and at the end. Now this is a literary device. When there is this in the beginning and this in the end, what does it mean? Does anybody know? It's called I think it's called a merismus. Let me write this word in the chat. Anybody know when, for example, when Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, I am the beginning and the end, what is he really saying? When he says, I am the beginning and the end, is he saying, I'm here in the beginning and then screw you and then I come at the end? What is he saying? Is he saying, I just pop at the beginning and then I pop at the end like a, you know, like an undignified father, right? Conceives and then arrives when they're 18 out of the blue. What is he saying when he says, I am the beginning and the end? Anderson, go ahead.
Is that kind of way of saying that he's all parts of everything?
Yes, very good. Excellent. You're so good at this, Anderson. Where have you studied?
I study a lot of this stuff.
Okay, that's why. I was like, wow, this guy knows his stuff. Very good. This is a Mary Smith's literary device, right? That implies that it's everywhere, right? So when Jesus says, I'm the beginning and the end, he's basically saying, I am with you always, right? That's another way to say that. I am with you every step of the way, from the beginning to the end. So when we have a woman at the beginning and a woman at the end, it means the gospel is full of women. The woman is at every step. And we see this, right? So in a way, so this is the first, already we can sense that this is a very different type of story, right? So we're going to see now a little bit with the 4 points, right, that we've studied already with the mother's house. And I will show how this text actually also belongs, right, in the mother's house. So this time I'm going to start with temple versus garden, because it makes more sense like this. So temple versus garden, then God as transcendent versus God as immanent, then rules versus transgression, and then holiness versus inclusivity, or separation versus inclusivity. I hope by now it's drilled in your head. What are the steps of the mother's house, right? Okay, so temple versus garden. So we have to understand this. I think this has really helped me understand even who Jesus is and what is the essence of his teaching. We have to understand the social political context in which the text is written. We are at a time where the Jews are on the brink of war with the Roman Empire, no less. And we know the Roman Empire, and the Jews, actually, the prophets, describe the Roman Empire as a huge beast, right? Which destroys everything on its passage, which is exactly what the Roman Empire did. That was the playbook. And so here is this little nation, right? And they're on the brink of war with this empire, basically, right? So, because they're just like that, that's their personality, right? So there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of terrorism going on, especially where Jesus was from, in Galilee. Galilee was the nest of the zealots. Just so you know what the zealots are, I'm going to write it down here. The zealots were basically Jewish terrorists who terrorists against the state, against the Roman Empire. So they would do kidnappings and murders, and there was a lot of violence through these people they were basically guerrilla warfare against the empire. And this was rampant in Galilee, where Jesus was from. Certainly, he grew up with zealots all around him. And so he had a good finger on the pulse of where history was headed. And he knew it was headed towards the conquest and the war with Rome, and Rome would crush them. He knew that, right? Anyone knew that who was a little bit intelligent, right? And not just taken over by emotion. So he could already predict, without even needing to be a prophet. And actually, Josephus, who became a historian, was already doing these predictions, right? So the very famous historian who wrote a number of works actually ended up working with the Romans, right? That's a whole other story. Right, in the air, people knew it was the end. We were in a time which was characterized by apocalyptic time. It was an end time atmosphere. And he knew Jerusalem would be crushed, and he knew the temple would be destroyed. Now we have to measure the significance of the destruction of the temple, because I don't think we realize what that really meant at the time. So nowadays, a church, gets on fire, we don't care. There are many churches. But we have to remember the temple was the place in the cosmos. It was the one and only, according to Jewish theology, it was the one and only dwelling place of God. If the temple is destroyed, no more God on earth. And we are left then to the victims of rampant evil forces, right? So the temple was the only way that cosmic harmony could be preserved, because this was the place where God dwelt on earth. From this space, the whole earth was redeemed. When the people brought sacrifices, we have to understand this. They really had this idea that the sacrifices that people brought and that the Levites sacrificed, right, was not just for the atonement of the Jews, it was for the atonement of the whole world, right? Especially once a year, they had a ceremony. We talked about the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement was not just about everybody's individual sins. It was about atoning for the whole world. So this temple was the seat of God, the throne of God in the world. If you destroy the seat of God, God has no more throne, no more impact on the world. And so the destruction of the temple was not just a national event, it was a catastrophe, it was a cosmic catastrophe. So Jesus is foreseeing this, and this is why we have so many references to the temple. But what he's going to do, and this is brilliant, I think, right? He's going to shift the theology, and he's going to say this temple will be destroyed, but the temple can be renewed and revived and rebirthed in our bodies. We are the temple from now on, right? So do you see how he's masterfully avoiding the catastrophe of God's departure from the world by saying this earthly, this material stone temple will be destroyed, but we human beings are now the new temples. We are the new thrones of God. We are the new, control room of God, right? Through us, God can continue to protect cosmic harmony, right? So this is one of the most important shifts that is being done by the Gospel of John. And I think this is one of the main contributions of the teachings of Jesus with regards to the other texts we have studied, and we'll talk about what that means exactly to be the temple of God, but he's going to shift from a stone temple to a flesh temple, right? And he's going to say it is urgent that we become temples if we are going to protect the presence of God on the earth, and if we are going to protect the influence and the impact of God on the cosmos. And if cosmic harmony is to be protected, we urgently need to become worthy temples for God, for the presence of God. So we have to see what that means. So that's the first point. I'm going to go into what that means spiritually in a second, but any questions and comments on this before I continue? Okay, so next point. This is going to make God completely different than what we are used to, right? So God, remember, transcendent versus God immanent, second point of the mother's house. What Jesus is saying here, which is unheard of, either in Greek or in Hebrew culture, is that God, who is holy, by the way, in Hebrew, let me write this down, in Hebrew is kadosh, which literally means separate, right? When we say God is holy, it means God is separate. You cannot join the two, right? What Jesus is saying, which is revolutionary, which is shocking, almost appalling, right, is that God, or rather extraordinary, right, is that God, who is supposed to be holy, is now going to dwell within us. Just that is just so new for everybody. This idea is so shocking, right? Because God is supposed to be so far away, and all of a sudden, what now? He will dwell in me? What does this mean? Right? What does this mean? And so I believe this is where many people misunderstood Jesus, because this is one of the most famous expressions when he says, I and the Father are one. He's not saying I am the Father. He's not saying I am God. He's saying God is in me. And all of us need to, I am a temple of God. God is in me. God dwells in me. And everything I do is through the power and the light and the wisdom of God, right? So this is completely new. This is a completely new idea which you do not have. You have a little bit. The only person who glimpsed this, who prophetically caught up on this idea in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, is David. Nobody else has figured this out. David, when he says in Psalm 51, after he has sinned, right, against Bathsheba and Uriah, he says, create in me a pure heart, O God, and restore your Holy Spirit on me. Meaning, God, please come upon me again. Your presence, let it be upon me again. This is, David had a glimpse of what Jesus is trying to say, that we all can have. So not just the king anymore is the Lord's anointed. We can all become the throne room of God himself, of the master of the universe, can dwell in us, right? So this is kind of, so the way this will be told, right? So John is going to use creation terminology in order to drive this point home, and we'll study it in John 1. What we're going to see here is a second creation, right? A moment, a stupendous moment of second creation, which we'll talk about when we do John 1, so I won't go too much into it, but it will be really the notion of what we're going to receive. John will call, it is called a second breath, right? We have received the first breath in the creation story when God breathed into our clay bodies, right? But here we are in a momentous event, moment in history where we are able to receive, there is a second creation happening, a second breath is coming, and this breath is the very spirit and soul of God, right? So it's not just physical breath now, it's the inner life of God, which can penetrate us, right? So this is very powerful. In the Greek context, in the Hebrew context, unheard of. In Hinduism, however, long theology of this already, that we are inhabited by God, right? So this is, if you presented the Gospel of John to a Hindu audience, they would be like, yeah, that makes sense. Ho-hum, right? We know this already, right? So this was, in Hinduism, they already believe that we are inhabited by God, right? And that we can tap into this divine essence through meditation, through yoga, and so forth. And I'm sure a lot of you have already experimented with that, right? But at the time when John is writing this, this is unheard of, right? Okay, so that's the second point. Any questions about this second point, about this revolutionary idea, which is shocking to a Jewish audience as well as to a Greek audience? For the Greeks, remember, God is the first cause and that's it. Then he withdraws, right? So the idea that God can enter and speak through and live through and love through us makes no sense, right, to the Greek audience, because God is a kind of a first cause, Big Bang, right? Okay, any questions about this? You guys are strangely quiet today. Okay, yes, Williams, go ahead.
Wouldn't this be more because of the fact that in Greek and Roman philosophy, they started to hit this point where instead of them thinking that God was the one giving you commands, you have your own consciousness. Like the development of consciousness as a theory in Greek philosophy started to evolve away from God talking to your mind and becoming something else.
Yeah, I like that.
So wouldn't that be part of it?
Absolutely. The internalization of the divine, right, is happening in Greek thought. Absolutely. I mean, I think the Stoics say that. I mean, there's, if you ever want, you guys want to explore anything interesting, is the connection between Paul and the Stoics. Wow, it's like they're the same. The Stoics said that we are the sons of God, right? And we have the substance of God within us. They say that straight up, right? And sometimes I wonder if they do not say this under the influence of Christianity, but that's another question. So yes, definitely there is a movement to a kind of internalization of the divine versus God being out there. God is more within. And by the way, all of these movements of internalization, interestingly enough, I don't know if this makes any sense or if this is any serious direction to take, but they all happen after the gospel stories. I don't see that before. The Stoics come after, Christian mysticism, Muslim mysticism, they all say the same thing, that God can be within us. Jewish mysticism also. So the mystical traditions, it seems, I'm not sure, right? But it seems they are evolving from these stories, perhaps, right? I don't know, not sure. Okay, let's go to the rules and versus transgression. So here with Jesus, right, we've often said, right, Jesus puts aside the law, blah, blah, blah. And it's not that he puts it aside, right? He's just saying, to the degree that you're inhabited by God, do you still need to laboriously work to become more like God? I think that's the question that is taking place here. If your heart has been shifted to spontaneously do the commandments, you do not need them written out and practiced like a elementary student, right? So for example, if you're a musician, right, well, here's a good example. I have a friend like this. He this is a great example. He was quite talented. He started very late studying the cello. And he just started right away with one of the hardest pieces in the repertoire of music, which is the partitas of Bach, right? Very difficult material. And he was just able to play, and he was, doing great. And he now pretty much masters, has really good technique, doing very well. Such a person, do they need to do the simple exercises and books that come before, right? This advanced material, in as much as you have mastered the advanced material, do you still need to do the scales and the arpeggios and the little exercises and the little kiddie songs, right? No, you have reached a level which is beyond those exercises. So I think in a way what Jesus is saying, or what this text is saying, is that in as much as your heart has shifted, you are now spontaneously doing it. You don't need to be thinking about it anymore in that sense. Crystal Dulu, go ahead.
In the I don't know what it's called, but anyway, when he goes to the temple and cleans it out, it's kind of it's a redemption of temple, but it's also a reaffirmation of the rules. That like these people have strayed from the rules, and they have to
Sorry, I couldn't hear the end of what you said.
Oh, they have to be like brought back into the fold.
Yeah, cleaning of the temple was, again, Jesus has a passionate love story with the temple, right? Obviously, because this is the place of God. But the traditions, what I've heard about it is that what was happening at the temple, and the reason why he did that was during the festivals, people would come from all over the world, Jews, right, to worship, and they couldn't bring the sacrifices with them on the road. So they would purchase them in the temple. And of course, as good businessmen, they would raise the prices because these poor people had no choice. They had come all this way. So here, now you're going to pay double for this, whatever cattle or bird. And so when Jesus saw that, it drove him crazy, and he just lost it. I think that, so it had to do with the way that, they were selling very expensive sacrifices and taking advantage of people who just wanted to worship to make money. And I think Jesus was really one of the first socialists, right? It drove him crazy. So it's less an affirmation of the old system, but for sure, he's cleansing the temple. He still talks about God as his father, so he's still very much working within a father's house system, but he is changing it from within, I think. And perhaps the cleansing of the temple is a way to say he's changing the system from within. Again, Jesus is not going to say, he's not going to destroy the system, but he's going to kind of, explode it from within. I think that's where he's headed. Interesting parable, he talks about how the kingdom of God is like leaven that you put in the dough, which rises and rises and rises. So it's a grassroots thing that slowly rises until it explodes. Everything becomes so big, right? So perhaps that was the way he was going to do it. Good. And last thing, separation versus inclusion, right? We see this very clearly, the way that, in fact, anytime Jesus breaks a rule, it's always to connect to another human being. When the rule keeps him from reaching and touching another human being, he breaks it. For example, he's in the synagogue on the Sabbath, and he sees a desperate soul who has suffered all their lives. And again, like O said, I love the way he said it, he can't resist, and he heals that person even though he's not allowed to heal on the Sabbath, right? Another way he transgresses is when he touches the sick. Normally, if you're a teacher of which Jesus was, you don't go around touching the dead. You don't touch the lepers because you're supposed to be holy, right? So he's breaking all the rules of ritual purity, right? By touching the dead, touching the lepers. He's breaking the gender rules by letting this woman be a disciple. By talking to the Samaritan woman, he's breaking ethnic rules, right? So Jesus is constantly trying to break the limits or break the walls that separate us, right? And anytime he's breaking a rule, it's really a wall that he's breaking, right? Okay, any last comments before we take a break? I really need a drink. Rudolph, go ahead.
Well, in the before class in our group, we had an interesting thought which we didn't quite finish discussing. However, it was brought up to say, well, maybe Jesus was just a regular revolutionary guy. There's an expression in Italian, I don't know if I say it right, rivoluzionario. It's the guy who questions everything. And if you read the Bible and that whole crucifixion segment there, it's Pontius Pilate calls him something along these lines, but a pseudo revolutionary, out of the fear that people would actually start believing that what Jesus is doing has something to do with the Holy Spirit, so that he doesn't lose control, and yada yada yada. So that's how that all works. That said, if you put it in the perspective of Jesus Christ perhaps being a member of society and not descending from heaven, having great philosophical wherewithal and being able to combine what's wrong with some pretty decent solutions, it puts the entire story of Jesus in a more palatable version. You know, it makes it easier to comprehend than to think that there is God and the Holy Spirit, and the Spirit of God is in Jesus, and, you know, now he walks on water. I mean, who knows how it all went down, but I like the idea, and Miss Oliveira brought it up earlier, to say, look, there are so many indications in John that do not make sense. They're just too far out for any human to comprehend. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how I understood it. But
I love it, because I love what you're saying, because what you're doing is appropriating the Messianic secret and making it, right, make sense for you. And I think we need to have the freedom to do that, right? I think the text is so ambiguous that that we all should be coming to it from different angles, right? Some of us will appreciate the miracles like, oh, as a sign of compassion. Some of us prefer seeing Jesus as a revolutionary. Some of us like the idea of him being the Son of God. Some of us prefer to see him as a social justice, right? So I think all of these interpretations are facets, right, of this secret. And I think we should have the freedom, every single one in the class, to make your own conclusions, right? Because you can. The secret is broad enough, right? Is subtle enough, is hidden enough that all of us can come and see, I see this secret, it means that for me, right? I think that was the original intent of the Gospels, was to really kind of awaken everyone's consciousness to a certain degree and be like, ooh, this is interesting, I wonder what it is, and let me explore it, right? Not to, you know, fling it in your face in a cross shape and be like, worship this or die, right? Like it's been done in history. So I love the way you have appropriated the secret and understood it in the way that fits for you. And I think I'm inviting everyone, right, to look at it, to explore it, without necessarily disclaiming the rest, right? The rest can be explored later, right? Me too. I prefer to talk of Jesus, as we're going to see, as a philosopher, but I'm not downplaying that there's other things involved that will merit my exploration in the future. So take what you can, but don't disclaim the rest. You might want to explore it at a later time. There's still something interesting there. Are you seeing what I'm saying, Rudolph? Yeah.
Sure.
Good. Oh, go ahead.
I think, for me at least, I do believe that there is a level in which everybody can interpret, like, freely their own, like, ideas of the Bible. But I guess, like, what challenges me is, like, when we like take a piece of text, like, I also believe that there are, like, some, I don't know if fundamental is the right word, but there is a purpose, like a main purpose and main reason behind the text, and, like, I think that's where it's, like, confusing, in a sense where, like, people, like, I guess all these theologians and everybody kind of conflict with, and yeah, it's like saying, like, when you read, like, for example, a novel, like, there's so many different interpretations of it, but, like, at the end of the day, like, the author's, like, the purpose of the book still remains, I guess, the main idea, in a sense.
Absolutely agree with you that when we need to approach it, everyone has to taste it at their own pace. I'm seeing it like the Messianic Secret, I'm seeing like a feast that is before us. And some of us have a small appetite, some of us are not yet hungry, some of us maybe want to try just this piece or that piece. And I think it's good. I take this piece, he takes that piece. But we should still, and this is the warning, I guess I would agree with you, that we should not ignore that there's more. And we should, to our benefit, there's more, right? And why not? And maybe we're not ready yet to explore that more, but it's there and it's waiting and it's available, right? So I'm also on a path of discovery of this Messianic secret. There are many things I don't understand, but I haven't downplayed them. I have put them here. This part of the banquet I'm not ready for, so I'm leaving it here. And I agree with you. We should not throw away the text. Some people are doing that. It's unbelievable. I have read, oh my God, I have read the worst rendition of the Gospels. These people who say this is what Jesus actually said. Actually, Stephen Mitchell, whom I love very much, who is a great translator and adapter of ancient texts, he's done this. He's wrote a book called The Gospel of Jesus. He's taken out all the supernatural, left all the wisdom. It's the worst thing I've ever read in my life. The whole wonder is gone. The beauty is finished. But I think it's okay to do that if you accept that there's still more to explore. And so I agree with O that as we explore this text and, take it in bite sizes, because not all of us can eat the whole thing, let's not downplay that there is more to be explored, maybe at a later time when we're ready. Does that make sense? Oh, do you see how I'm agreeing with you? Right? In a way? Okay, great. All right, guys, I need to drink. So if I don't drink, I'm going to just collapse. So we'll take a break until 50. Let's do until 55. Shall we do that? About 8 minutes, 55. And then we'll come back. I'll continue to introduce, and then we'll do John chapter 1. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.